Okay, so I think welcome once again to all our participants and today's esteemed guest, Professor Ithamar Theodor. So we are really delighted and excited for his talk. I went through some of his papers and his books are really, really amazing. And the way he puts up different difficult concepts of Bhagavad-Gita for a modern audience, it's really remarkable. So just a formal introduction of Professor Theodor. Professor Theodor is a professor of Asian Studies at the University of Haifa in Israel. He's the author of several books, most notably Exploring the Bhagavad-Gita, Philosophy, Structure and Meaning, published back in 2010. And after that, he also has a lot of publications. It's a kind of very choicest academic title. It received many awards, particularly the winner of 2014 Dharma Academy Award from North America, DANAM Book Award for Excellence in Indic Studies. And I think the best introduction of Professor Theodor would be his lecture, as all of you are excited, and including me. So without further delay, so I hand over the stage to Professor Theodor. Thank you very much for kindly accepting our invitation. So thank you. So the participants, they can type their questions as sir continues, and formally we'll take up all the questions at the end. So probably maybe 45 minutes or 1 hour the lecture would go, and then we can ask the questions. Okay, thank you. So, sir, please continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jyotiranjan Prabhu and Institute for Science and Spirituality for your very kind invitation. I'm honored and happy to be with you, although through Zoom, I would have preferred to be in person, but anyway, it was convenient. I will read my paper. It's also easier because my pronunciation may not be the most clear, so you can see it on screen. Mm-hmm. But basically, my paper is about offering the Bhagavad-Gita as a potential world philosophy, actually. I see it as a potentially world philosophy, especially in the realm of ethics. So I'm now sharing my screen. And I hope you see the screen clearly?
Yeah, clearly, perfect.
Yeah, okay. So this is the Bhagavad-Gita's potential for the construction of postmodern global ethics. At the end of the 20th century, postmodernity has entered the global cultural and intellectual arena and has since offered a new interpretation of reality. The modern era, one of the peaks of which is the movement of enlightenment, has offered a sense of optimism based on a promise for rationality and knowledge, as the liberating and unifying agents for humanity at large, and as leading humanity to a better future through the application of technology and science. Accordingly, humanity was held to be gradually but constantly progressing towards a new and better world, and as such shared a collective memory and a sense of rationality. This sense of unified identity had projected a sense of completeness on the individual and on society at large. The combination of postmodernism with the capitalist globalization that challenged existing moral systems inter alia as the external frameworks underlying moral paradigms have weakened. Accordingly, notions of personal identity based upon religion, nationality, ethnicity, etc., have become less valid and more flexible, and a similar diminution has affected ethical codes and values. In characterizing the postmodern scene, writes Stephen Conner, important changes had taken place in politics, economics, and social life, changes that could broadly be characterized by the two words delegitimation and dedifferentiation. Authority and legitimacy were no longer so powerfully concentrated in the centers they had previously occupied, and the differentiations, for example, those between what had been called centers and margins, but also between classes, religions, and cultural levels, high culture and low culture, were being eroded or complicated. Centrist or absolutist notions of state, nourished by the idea of a uniform movement of history toward a single outcome, were beginning to weaken. It was no longer clear who had the authority to speak on behalf of history. The rise of an economy driven by its peripheries, by patterns of consumption, rather than from its center by the needs of production, generated much more volatile and unstable economic conditions. These erosions of authority were accompanied by a breakdown of hitherto unbridgeable distinctions between centers and peripheries, between classes and countries. According to Coder, one of the outcomes of the processes of delegitimation and differentiation was the rise of an economy driven by consumerism rather than by rationally justified needs. The consumerist-driven economy naturally attempts to arouse greed in the potential customers, and as such has a clear ethical implications of furthering greed and a sense of need over self-restraint and satisfaction. It seems that the optimistic and erect human being who entered the 20th century has been replaced by a bent and bound human being who is no longer so sure of the direction he is heading, as well as the goals to be set by humanity at large. Similarly, the complete and clear personal identity maintained a century ago or so, whether Western or Eastern, is gradually being replaced by the new image of the global person whose identity is divided and obscure, and who doesn't seem to adhere to the modern worldview. The hierarchical and rational order characterizing modernity is replaced by a somewhat circumstantial, chaotic, and unlimited range of opportunities and possibilities. Considering the apparent gradual decline of the Western worldview as offering a helpful paradigm for living and acting within the postmodern reality, it may well be that Asian patterns of thought may be more conducive to lead human society at this day and age. It may well be that by looking at the Bhagavad-Gita in this light, this ancient source may be found to supply a fresh view of reality and a philosophy which may better guide the individual and global society at present. This is so because the Bhagavad-Gita's underlying metaphysical and moral categories seem to be immune to this decline of identity and have a potential for growth in the present conditions, as they all spring from internal categories which can maintain their relevance and function despite an external chaotic reality. This paper first highlights the structure of the Bhagavad-Gita and suggests that it is comprised of hierarchical concept of reality. As such, it can maintain the optimism of a well-organized society, along with the critical view of a reality which is subjected to a constant flow and change. It then points to the moral system derived by the Bhagavad-Gita's underlying assumptions, a system which is not based on the need of confronting to an external world order and is free from any form of social contract, rather is based on a yogic kind of progression on the path of internal growth, ultimately leading to moksha. These two features suggest that the Bhagavad-Gita may be a source of serious postmodern global philosophy and offer both metaphysical and ethical relevant worldviews. It may well be that Western metaphysics and epistemology have a tendency to build upon dialectics and dualities, and as such rely upon dichotomy and antagonism for the construction of valid knowledge. As such, the dichotomy between duty versus freedom, the individual interest versus the social or public interest, the moral versus the pleasurable or matter versus spirit, are all inherent principles of Western thought. It may well be that in times of a greater social and personal stability, these tensions were taken as an intellectual stimuli and a positive force in the development of social welfare and scientific progress. In such an atmosphere, Indian thought was considered to be esoteric, mystic, naive, and even out of touch with reality. However, the present postmodern era has created a somewhat new circumstance of instability and quick changes influenced by the development of global transformation and communication, which allow almost free and unlimited possibilities of transforming people, commodities, and ideas. In this new and unstable circumstance, the Western patterns of thought lack a solid basis upon which the simulation of further tension could become a positive force. These ideas were enforced by Philippa Berry, who writes, "From the perspective of postmodern ethics, the very fragility and porousness of the West global power structures will ultimately require a much more thoughtful and measured interpretive response than the violent policing of our cultural and economic differences that we have seen after 9/11. Suffice it to say that the vital contribution of deconstruction or post-structuralism to postmodern theory has not yet revolutionized the much less reflective field of international relations. Yet through the repeated interrogation of the centrality of the Western thought of polarized categories such as light, dark, good, evil, atheism, belief, these discourses remind us of the need to reflect upon our ontological and epistemological deserts as we reopen the shadowy and liminal terrain between opposing concepts. Responding to these differences requires a seemingly perverse admixture of reason with a revitalized imaginative faculty. Very well articulates the polarized structure of Western thought and sheds light on the need to reopen the liminal terrain between the opposing concepts to the articulation of a more thoughtful and measured interpretive response. It may well be that the Indian patterns of thought have a potential for unifying the divided reality through building upon underlying assumptions which are immune to the seemingly conflicting values and terms and the constant change and flow of values and ideas. These Indian ideas, and especially the Vedanta tradition, have acted in a similar way in another historical period of great innovation, instability, and idiosyncrasies. In describing this, writes Hardy, the period under discussion, say 6th to 10th century AD, may generally be characterized as extremely flexible and undefined, which means that indigenous trends and various northern stimuli left sufficient scope for a great variety of sociological, doctrinal, and personal idiosyncrasies and innovations. This situation gave birth to superb and unique creations, but it is not surprising that after a century or so, the ferment calmed down and a more stable and rigid systems evolved. On the whole, this was due to the consolidated influence of the Vedanta in the South, which gave rise to the formation of schools of thought like the Advaita Vedanta and Vishishta Advaita. It may well be that the present global situation is similar to the Indic situation in the second half of the first millennium, where a great variety of sociological, doctrinal, and personal idiosyncrasies and innovations have taken place within a short time, and that the ferment was consolidated by the rising influence of Vedanta, which emerged as a consolidating force, able to reconcile the various ideas into a relatively unified system. Similarly, despite the seemingly present chaotic intellectual circumstance, it may well be that given the relevant interpretation, this ferment may be calmed down and consolidated with the influence of the Indian and specifically Vedantian thought, represented by the Bhagavad-Gita, which would further a more stable system of global thought. Now I'd like to speak about divided reality in the Bhagavad-Gita. The Bhagavad-Gita is one of the triple foundations of Vedanta, and as such shares qualities characterizing a Vedantian text such as hierarchical grades of reality. Shlomo Biderman sheds further light on the issue of hierarchical reality in Indian philosophy. He writes, in Indian philosophy, one can find two principal metaphysical positions. For the sake of convenience, I shall call one of them the realistic or direct position, and the second one the hierarchical position. In short, I shall say that philosophers who believe in the direct realistic position assume that reality itself is unified, that is, does not contain divisions or layers, and one should not submit to it different interpretations. Therefore, reality is subject to direct human recognition. Philosophers taking the hierarchical position assume that reality is not unified, but contains differing levels or other stages. There is a higher or superior reality and a lower and inferior reality, and one must distinguish between absolute and relative reality. Thus, when we ask, how can we recognize reality? We must reply not with an answer, but with a question. To what reality are you referring? Do you mean reality of the first order or reality of the second order? Do you mean absolute reality or empirical reality? Do you mean permanent or changing reality? Apparently, in Indian philosophy, one can find two principal metaphysical positions, which could be possibly called the realistic or direct position and the hierarchical position. Those who accepted the direct realistic position, such as the Mimamsakas, assume that reality itself is unified, that is, does not contain divisions or layers. Others, such as the Vedantians, accepting the hierarchical position, assume that reality is not unified but contains differing levels, or rather layers. There's a higher or superior reality and a lower or inferior reality. And one must distinguish between absolute and relative reality. Shankara accepted at least two levels of reality. I prefer to relate to these two levels as the world of Dharma and the world of moksha. The world of Dharma refers to the reality of the world in its simple and commonly accepted manner, in which people live in this world with the aspiration of living happy, secure, and cultured lives. In this first level, the general rule in terms of value is to prosper, and worldly happiness and prosperity are desired and are considered good. In terms of being, the individual is defined as a human being or any other living being, such as an animal or plant. The worldview of the Dharma corresponds in general to the modern worldview, as it is rational, organized, responsible, and optimistic. However, the higher level, that of the world of moksha, is different as it perceives the world in different, somewhat mystical terms of an unlimited reservoir of spirit souls, endlessly wandering through samsara. On this level, the value of worldly prosperity is rejected in favor of non-attachment to the world and the indifference to both worldly happiness and distress, along with yoging oneself to the higher reality of moksha. Here, the value of being equal-minded towards both happiness and distress and seeking absorption in Brahman is superior. In terms of being, the individual person does not perceive of himself any longer as a human or other being, but as an eternal spirit soul bound by the laws of karma and constantly flowing through samsara. Thus, the conscious subject is not anymore a human being, rather an eternal spirit soul. As the two levels represent internal cognitive states or attitudes, one who sees the world from the point of view of the first level is convinced that he is a human being and that his aim is to prosper. Similarly, he who sees the world from the point of view of the second story considers himself an embodied spiritual self whose aim is to get released from that condition. From the idea of the jiva as constituting the human being's essential personhood emerges the idea of human personality, which is naturally contingent, being constructed by the three gunas. The Bhagavad-Gita's concept of human being is based upon an internal category. In other words, its concept of human nature is based upon the concept of the gunas, as opposed to an external category, whether it is theological, such as adherence to divine will, or rational, such as adherence to a universal notion of personality. An example of this notion of personhood may be found in the Bhagavad-Gita's 15th chapter. I quote from the Gita: "The eternal soul existing with this world of souls is indeed my fragment. It draws to itself the six senses, including the mind, which are all rooted in material nature. When accepting a body or when relinquishing it, the prevailing soul carries along with it the six senses, just as air carries fragrances from their sources. Through hearing, sight, touch, taste, and smell, as well as the mind, it experiences the sense objects. At times it remains within the body, at times it departs from it, and at other times it enjoys under the guna spell." This is Bhagavad-Gita, 15th chapter. The vision of human personality as comprised of the gunas and governed by the senses is very different than the basic Western construction of personhood, which emphasizes rationality as the fundamental ingredient of personhood. For the purpose of comparison, the Western classical definition of personhood may be mentioned and briefly discussed. In regards to the classical Western definition of the person by Boethius, writes Henry Chadwick. This is now Western theology of personhood. Boethius then proceeds to go to the so-called Porphyrian tree, illustrating the distinction between substances. Substance divides into corporeal and incorporeal. Corporeal divides into animate and inanimate. Animate into sensible and insensible. Sensible into rational and irrational, i.e., life principle of the animals. Rational into that which is impassible and immutable by nature, with God, and that which is so by the grace and by transformation, angels and the soul. Within this general scheme, person cannot be applied to inanimate objects or to irrational animals. The term applies only to rational beings, that is, to man, God, and angels. Moreover, person is a term of substance, not accidents, and is individual, not universal. Its location is therefore established in relation to the grid set out early in Boyce's commentary on the categories. Person is a term of the individual rather than universal substance. Therefore, a correct definition of a person is the individual substance of a rational nature. Naturae rationalibus individua substantia, in Latin. Despite some objections raised, Boethius' definition was accepted as venerable starting point for the Christian tradition, defended even by Aquinas, who defended Boethius as a writer on the subject who is received with veneration due to authority. What are the implications of the definition of a person as an individual substance of a rational nature? Such a definition, considering rationality to be the essence of personhood, will naturally aspire to refine human rationality further and further, and may lead to cultural expressions such as the Enlightenment and the emergence of science, which had indeed occurred historically and to a large extent represent the core and peak of Western culture. However, this definition lacks a solid direction according to which rationality may be applied, and as such, rationality may become subservient to utilitarianism and consumerism, as is actually happening at present. However, a definition which furthers release from samsara as an essential component possesses natural ethical implications in that the path leading to moksha necessitates an attitude of self-restraint and a reduction of greed, and as such has a potential for offering an alternative to the values of consumerism, which are furthered by the capitalist globalization. The Bhagavad-Gita's concept of essential individuality is that of a jiva or atman, which for the purpose of this chapter, this paper, serve as more or less the same. The jiva, conditioned by the world of samsara, constantly flows through eternally changing circumstances to the universal waves of prakriti. The Bhagavad-Gita's 13th chapter states, you should know that material nature, prakriti, and the living entity, purusha, are both beginningless. Also know that the transformations as well as the gunas originate from material nature. It is said that material nature is the cause in the matter of producing causes and effects. It is said that the living entity is the cause in the matter of experiencing pleasure and pain. The living entity situated in material nature experiences the gunas, which are the product of material nature. Its association with the gunas is the cause of birth in a good or bad womb. This description of reality offered by the Bhagavad-Gita is somewhat compatible with the postmodern image of reality, in that reality is not necessarily fixed or rationally organized. Rather, it offers unlimited opportunities, and one individually surfs through these opportunities on his own, thus experiencing pleasure and pain according to his or her choices. As such, the sole fixed reality is the reality of one's own existence, and this individual reality allows a coherent logic of causality, as only the individual himself is the cause of his own pleasure and pain. Now, let me speak about ethics, transformational ethics in the Bhagavad-Gita. Having articulated the Bhagavad-Gita's two metaphysical levels, we may now look at the question, how does the Bhagavad-Gita aspire to transform its readers or lead them from the lowest level to the highest, i.e. from samsara to moksha? Let us first look briefly at the notion of religious or spiritual transformation. Keith Ward calls the process of religious transformation a process of self-transcendence, and it refers to the transformation one undergoes in its progress from the finite realm to the infinite realm, which to our minds corresponds to the transformation one undergoes in his journey from samsara to moksha. He writes, it is important to see that religion is not attempting to posit another object which we may one day come across, and it is not attempting to communicate a purely dispassionate or theoretical vision of how things are. Religion is primarily concerned with the transformation of the self by appropriate to that which is most truly real. It is not so much an attempt to see the world differently as to be in the world in a different manner. The vision is not primarily of another thing, but of oneself as transfigured by the infinite. Does this process by which one is transformed by the infinite as a result sees the world in a new way correspond to the Indian notion of path or marga? The transformational process can be taken as an internal journey, as in an external journey, one experiences a constant change of the external environment, whereas in an internal journey, such as religious transformation, one experiences the world in a different manner. In other words, the more one progresses, the progress he makes, the different the world seems to him. The idea of progressing on the path or marga may be related to by pointing at the two possible courses undertaken by an individual at any point in life, the horizontal and the vertical. The horizontal approach would move between good and bad, between pleasure and pain, and will not involve progress towards moksha. However, the vertical approach will aim at transcending the self in a transformational attempt of getting someone closer to the infinite. As such, one undergoes transformation in his gradual progress from the lower level of Dharma, characterizing by the Atman's being bound in samsara, to the higher level of moksha, or complete freedom from samsara and attainment of Brahman. The path offered by the Bhagavad-Gita may be compared to a ladder, and each of its steps leads to a higher and consecutive one. A lower step may be characterized as a stage of simple utilitarianism, and a person in that stage is he who acts to maximize gain in this world. A higher state may be characterized as a stage of dharmic utilitarianism, and a person in that stage is he who acts to maximize gain to the performance of dharma, a gain which may be earned in future life or other worlds too. The next stage is the stage of following dharma for its own sake, or performing one's duty for the sake of duty. This stage of performing one's duty for the sake of duty represents a pure mode of action, free from the desire for its fruits, and represents one of the central teachings of the Bhagavad-Gita. I mean, of course, karmani eva dikaraste ma paleshu kadachana ma karma pala heturbur mate sangast karmani, the famous 247 verse. The next stage rejects the value of the Vedas, which are considered to be engaged with worldly gains, in favor of a higher ideal, the attainment of Brahman. This stage may be named action for the sake of the highest good of Brahman. He who thus acts may act in karma yoga, disinterested from the fruits of his actions, and may offer those fruits to the Supreme. He may practice jnana yoga, ashtanga yoga, or bhakti yoga. However, all these yoga practices have the common goal of detaching oneself from worldly existence and attachments, fostering enlightenment and renunciation, and making progress towards the ideal of moksha. Having perfected the stage of yoga, he finally elevates himself to the third level, that of moksha, and becomes absorbed in Brahman, either in an impersonal way, such as in Shankara's system, or through love of God, such as in Ramanuja's system. The stages may be summarized as simple utilitarianism, dharmic utilitarianism, duty for its own sake, acting for the sake of the highest good of Brahman, the stage of yoga, and the stage of moksha in its personal or impersonal version. Thus, a ladder of values is formed, whereas the higher one's motive for action is, the higher he is situated within the Bhagavad-Gita's ethical structure. In this way, the Bhagavad-Gita aspires to encompass the entire ethical realm of existence, while encouraging all to ascend the ladder of motives, thus distancing oneself from the state of samsara and making gradual progress towards the state of moksha. Another way of looking at the Bhagavad-Gita's ethics is through terms morality and religion, in regards to which writes A.L. Herman. The Bhagavad-Gita is a blueprint for liberation that definitely combines moral elements with religious elements. On the moral side, it prescribes one of the four duties or dharmas for right actions related to an individual's guna nature as expressed through caste or varna to which that individual belongs. On the religious side, it prescribes one of the three yogas or attitudes for liberation related to individual guna nature, bringing the moral duties together with the religious attitudes will give us a blueprint for liberation that we call teleological attitude liberationalism. This blueprint for liberation consists the ethics of the Bhagavad-Gita. Herman's noting the term morality is compatible with my use of the term Dharma, and Herman's denoting the term of religion is compatible with my use of the term moksha. The Bhagavad-Gita recommends the path of action, which is the means by which the performer is to be elevated all the way from the level of Dharma to that state of moksha. This suggests a kind of ethics which may be regarded as transformational ethics, and which may be characterized by the performance of one's dharmic duty in view of progressing towards the ultimate release from samsara. This kind of ethics is unique in that it simultaneously adheres to both requirements or ideals, the ideal of maintaining a fixed, stable, and optimistic world order and worldview, and the ideal of liberation, which is accompanied by a more flowing or non-fixed perception of reality. As the former worldview is compatible with the modern worldview, and as the latter is compatible with the postmodern one, I believe that the Bhagavad-Gita's ethics may offer a serious global ethical system. Accordingly, morality is not defined as an external forced framework, which may leave the human beings to eternally struggle between the moral state and the pleasurable state. Rather, the Bhagavad-Gita's concept of morality is based upon a path of yogic upliftment and personal progress towards moksha. As such, the Bhagavad-Gita's concept of moral upliftment is based upon a ladder-like internal individual effort for personal growth, as opposed to an adherence to an external moral command. This ladder is exemplified in the Bhagavad-Gita's 12th chapter. Fix your mind on me alone and absorb your conscience in me. Thus you shall abide in me ever after without doubt. If you are not able to fix your consciousness steadily upon me, then aspire to reach me through the repeated yoga practice, O Dhananjana. If you are even incapable of such practice, accept the path of action, which has me as its highest goal, since by acting for me you shall attain perfection. But if you are unable to follow this path of taking refuge in me through activity devoted to me, then give up the fruits of all your work, of all your actions, thus being self-restrained. Knowledge is superior to practice. Meditation is superior to knowledge, and relinquishment of the fruits of actions is higher than meditation. As from such relinquishment, tranquility soon follows. So this is an example of a ladder in the 12th chapter, going downwards. The Bhagavad-Gita offers not only a scheme for personal morality, rather a social moral plan too. And that is, of course, the framework of Dharma. The concept of Svadharma is based upon one's own duties, which spring from one's nature. And in that, it offers an holistic sense of social responsibility, as opposed to a moral structure based upon a social contract based on utilitarianism or pure reason. The intertwining of dharmic morality with spirituality through a yogic sense of enlightenment action may be a serious alternative to moral principles in a chaotic world. The Bhagavad-Gita therefore has the potential of offering a universal moral system of which its underlying notions are all based upon philosophical internal notions, and these are potentially more suitable to the present global worldview. So thank you very much. This was my paper.
Yeah, it was great. So I formally invite questions from the participants. So before, there are some questions already, but just to get started. So one thing, as I reflect, it actually, yeah, can you hear? Yeah, I think it's there.
I hear everything is fine.
Okay. So as you reflect in Western approaches to morality, I mean, and the way Bhagavad-Gita speaks. So do you see a difference of basis of morality? I mean, what grounds that morality on something? Like, what's the fundamental way, what's the fundamental difference in that sense?
Yes, thank you very much. I try to point at the definition of the human person in both Western and I would say Bhagavad-Gita's worldview. In the Western worldview, it is rationality. I try to point out. And rationality has no ethical direction. That was my basic argument, that rationality goes everywhere. It doesn't have a guiding principle.
Inconclusive, practically.
But if you look at the Bhagavad-Gita, the human nature, svabhava, is defined by the gunas. I mean, I am defined by my gunas, that the way my personality is defined, the construction of my gunas. Now, the gunas define my dharma. The gunas define my duty, whether my duty is to be a teacher or administrator or soldier or a merchant or agriculture or artisan. It's all defined by my nature. It is internal.
Right.
So, first of all, my dharma is defined by my gunas, and it's not external. It's not that someone tells me what to do, but I can look in the mirror, so to speak, and see what my gunas are. So that's the first point. The second point is that the yoga of the Bhagavad-Gita, if you look at the yoga of the Bhagavad-Gita, it is constructed like a yoga ladder, but a karma yoga ladder, not a Ashtanga yoga ladder, a karma yoga ladder, that one performs one's dharma and then purifies that. It goes higher and higher, and eventually karma yoga becomes bhakti yoga and pure bhakti. This is the structure of the Bhagavad-Gita. The Bhagavad-Gita has a ladder, just like the yoga ladder, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So the Bhagavad-Gita has a similar ladder of action, of karma yoga, which is grounded in dharma. And that is based upon my own svabhava, my own nature. So that, on the one sense, that defines me as a human being. It defines my duty in this world in a responsible way. I act towards other human beings in a responsible and beneficial way, because this is Dharma. I serve society in my capacity. I act for the welfare of human society. I'm a responsible person, a good person. That's basically Dharma. But also, it contains the potential for self-realization, if you like, or of gradually stepping towards moksha, towards release from samsara. Right. And that gives me, as a human being, a direction. I'm not circumstantial. I'm not going anywhere. I'm focusing. I have a direction, and that direction calls for restraint, for morality, for being a better person. And it's all there in the definition of a human being, which is there in the Bhagavad-Gita, by that svabhava, or by the gunas.
Yeah, right. Very nicely you put things together. Very wonderful. Thank you. So, as I reflect, I mean, Bhagavad-Gita is there in India. I mean, it's from this continent, but still we see. Honestly speaking, a lot of people know, but still many times there is a lack of a dichotomy between what's there expected from Dharma and what actually people practice, like cheating, all kind of stuff is there, which is not otherwise so visible in a polished Western society. So how do you see, although they don't have a proper basis for morality, but still many times we see at least the social behavior. Do you see a contrast between what's there and what's here in the land of Vedic culture?
But first of all, Bhagavad-Gita is, of course, very popular in India and Bharat, and it's wonderful. I think that my work, academics define my work as philosophical. They say that mostly Bhagavad-Gita is accepted in India as religion. It's considered to be religion, spoken by gurus, by sadhus, which is wonderful. It's wonderful. But they define me as in a sense, looking at the Bhagavad-Gita as philosophy. as philosophy. Maybe that is my unique contribution, that I look at the Bhagavad-Gita as philosophy. And I'm also doing something which is quite, I think, unique in world terms. I mean, I just no one else says that. I actually speak of the Bhagavad-Gita as a potential for philosophy, not only religion, not only ontology, that we look in the way the Bhagavad-Gita was written some 2,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, depending upon which point of view, not only looking at it in from within ontological terms, but I actually look at it as philosophy. That this is my project. I really think so. I really think that there is a great potential for a global philosophy in this day and age, and I analyze it in rational terms. And I'm saying that for the era of modernity, the Bhagavad-Gita was considered to be mystical. But because postmodernity has entered the global arena, the Bhagavad-Gita is more immune. It has more potential to work in that. So in many ways, my work is new in that I try to work the Bhagavad-Gita as a philosophy in academic circles and beyond also. And perhaps in that sense, I'm innovating and offering a different view. I think that it's wonderful that many people follow the Gita, learn the Gita. I mean, I'm so inspired that so many people study the Gita. It's wonderful. At the same time, my point of view is specifically academic, philosophical, and I'm trying to turn the Bhagavad-Gita to actually a
philosophical treatise. Yeah, in the Western way of thinking. So,
well, I'm kind of in between. I'm a devotee. I was trained in ISKCON, which gave me a very deep grasp of the Bhagavad-Gita, no doubt. I studied at the theology faculty, University of Oxford, and I got very valuable kind of knowledge there. I was trained. I very much value what I studied there in Oxford. I'm an Israeli. Israelis are in between, not exactly east, not exactly west. In between. I don't know. That's my gunas in this life. And I'm trying to understand this 21st century. Basically, this 21st century is, they say, the Asian century. I mean, it's not me saying that. 20th century was considered the American century, 19th century, the British century, and 21st century is considered to be the Asian century. And in Asian thought, I mean, Asian countries, specifically India and China, will also want to influence world philosophy, not only strategy and economics, but also philosophy. So how will it happen? I mean, someone has to work it out and see. I was teaching for a few years in Hong Kong, China, and I also published a book on comparative Indian and Chinese philosophy and religion. I did some, and my conclusion is that the Bhagavad-Gita is also compatible with the Chinese forms of religion.
Is the same book as Brahman and Tao?
Yeah, Brahman and Tao. This is the book I meant. Yeah, Brahman and Tao. And that was my conclusion, that the Bhagavad-Gita is also compatible in many ways to a Chinese philosophy and religion. I have a chapter in that the Brahman and Tao book. And I can analyze, but it has a potential of, I think, emerging as a Central Asian, Indian and Asian text because of its potential. That's basically what I'm thinking.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there is really a time to learn the concepts that's there in Bhagavad Gita in a proper philosophical way. Most of the Indians, they take it as some in religious sentiment, I would say. So if somebody grasps the essence, I think that would make a change, perhaps. So that's really need of the hour. So one more thing I reflect, the ontological and the epistemological basis of Bhagavad Gita. So when I contrast with, for example, anybody who is not part of Vedic culture, or even the born in this land but not really educated in this land, I mean, this structure, which is very common nowadays in modern youth, even in India, they are not familiar with the basic ontological structure or epistemology that is used in the Vedic text. So they are more towards trained in the Western way of thinking, and I would say rationality is the basis of everything. And as you said, rationality doesn't lead us really to any moral judgment or anything. It's practically inconclusive. I mean, if you find, I mean, in the sense, it doesn't say which moral code of conduct to be followed or not. So that way. So do you also see such problems? I mean, this ontological and epistemological barriers, which is very specific to Bhagavad Gita and otherwise not so much found in other traditions and other scriptures, like particularly the focus on Sabda Praman. I mean, which is you talk about the divine revelations, of course, and then on the basis of that, and then the five fundamental ontological structures that's there in Bhagavad Gita, like the Prakriti, Kal, Jeev, and all those things. How do you really make these concepts accessible to a non-initiated person? I mean, which is really tough time. I mean, particularly the concept of Atman and all.
I would say a few things. First of all, as far as what's happening here, I think in some ways, Bhagavad Gita study is following that which happened to the yoga tradition. Yoga emerged in India, and it went out to the West. It was a great success, and perhaps it was modern yoga was reworked in the West and then reclaimed by India. Say, oh, it's very valuable. Actually, it's ours. So perhaps also here it's happening here. Bhagavad Gita is Indian, but a person like myself, who is a devotee of Krishna, but also an Oxford graduate, and an Israeli, I'm working the Bhagavad Gita, trying to rationalize it, to find out, and perhaps re-articulate it. And then in India, it will be reclaimed. We'll say, oh, we have such a good thing. Let's take it back and think it also in these terms. So in a sense, I may be doing a service to India by working this text. So that's one thing. But then as far as ontology and epistemology, I think the Bhagavad Gita has a very unique structure. Right. And this is my main argument in my book, Exploring the Bhagavad Gita. This morning, I was reading with my students Katha Upanishad about Nachiketas and Yama and so forth. I mean, it was a wonderful reading. I really enjoyed that. It was really nice. And I was reflecting upon the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Many verses there are quite similar to the Bhagavad Gita second chapter. Then some verses about chapter 13. Very interesting verses, beautiful verses. But I didn't see, I'm not so familiar with the Katha Upanishad, but I didn't see the structure of the Bhagavad Gita. And with the Bhagavad Gita, it has a special structure. And as I mentioned before, you can actually see a ladder, which is quite similar to the yoga ladder, but it's not an Ashtanga yoga ladder. Rather, it is the karma yoga ladder. It is grounded in Dharma.
Right.
And it goes all the way up to moksha or to bhakti. That's a wonderful structure, which I think is quite unique. So the ideas of the Bhagavad Gita may be found in other texts. You may find ideas about Dharma, you may find yoga, you may find Upanishads. I mean, all these ideas. But in the Gita, they are brought together in a very unique way, which translate their epistemology and ontology into a structure which I call the three-story house structure. This is my main argument in that book, Exploring the Bhagavad Gita. By the way, I also published that again just a year ago in that book, the Bhagavad Gita Critical Introduction. That book published both are in the Indian market, Exploring Bhagavad-Gita and Bhagavad-Gita Critical Introduction, published by Routledge. And the other book, I also offer the structure there, but then you have various articles and chapters by very famous scholars. I mean, you have Professor Arvind Sharma, who is writing in that book, very famous scholar of Bhagavad-Gita, and other scholars. So also I want to say that the idea of the ladder is a traditional idea actually coming from Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And you know from whom?
Yeah, and I don't know.
From Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur.
Okay.
It comes from Vishwanath Chakravarti. He has this idea of ladder in his Bhagavad Gita commentary.
Okay.
Gaudiya Vaishnavism devotees were not always so inclined to offer Bhagavad Gita commentaries. Some felt it wasn't devotional enough. They wanted more devotional rasa type materials.
Yeah.
But some acharyas actually wrote Bhagavad Gita commentaries. Advaita Acharya apparently wrote a Bhagavad Gita commentary, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also wrote a Bhagavad Gita commentary. And of course, Srila Prabhupada, that was his first book. He was very, very much into the Gita, very strong in the Gita. But all I'm saying that within the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, it wasn't always clear what the position of the Gita was. Of course, it's taught by Krishna, but still, it was like more about external things, Dharma, yoga, the senses, the gunas, desires. Topics which were not only always considered to be internal to devotional realm. It's not like surrender. Of course, you have Sarva Dharman Parityaja, Mamekam Sharanam Vraja, and so forth. You have it, but it's not like Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, for example, which is all there about a practice of devotion. So anyhow, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he wrote a Gita commentary, Sarartha Varshini Tika, and his commentary has the seeds of these ideas. Actually, I studied this idea of the yoga ladder in the VIHE, Vrindavan Institute for Higher Education, years ago from Burijan Prabhu.
Okay.
And I was very impressed. And later I asked him, Prabhu, where did you find it? He says, go to Vishwanath Chakravarti. And I found it there. I went and I found a translation by Banu Swami, and I found there the ideas. So this idea of the ladder is not my own invention. I'm offering it perhaps a modern interpretation, but it is a traditional Gaudiya Vaishnava idea. It's in a tradition, and it's the sources are very clearly at Vishwanath Chakravarti's Bhagavad Gita commentary.
So the concept of ladder kind of little difficult sometimes, because we talk about bhakti being inclusive of other strata also. So instead of being ladder, it's something like a bigger and bigger enclosure. I would say helical, something like that. It's enclosing lower structures inside it. So is that not a right way to think also? Ladder, once you cross the ladder, so you give up the older ones, so the lower steps. But the way probably Bhagavad-Gita, please correct me if I'm wrong. So the Bhakti Yoga includes the the elements of Jnana and the Karma also, because we do not give up our activities, we do not give up our intellectual abilities. So that way, some elements are already in part, but more aligned towards the absolute. So, what is your take on that?
I think we're talking of the same thing, but we're looking at from different points of view. I think you're saying you're looking from the point of view of bhakti.
Yeah.
And then you're saying bhakti includes the others.
Yeah.
I'm looking lower. I'm looking at human nature. I'm looking in a more universal, humanistic way. And I'm saying, let's look at Dharma and climb up all the way to bhakti.
Right.
But
then
basically,
it's
I think our point of departure is different. My point of departure is lower. I'm departing from human nature and saying one climbs up step by step. But in my structure, one does not give up Dharma, does not give up yoga, does not give up jnana. Right. It's all inclusive. The consciousness goes up, and the peak is bhakti, of course, but one maintains all the way one's dharma and all the other practices. This is very interesting, very important to understand. It's like Arjuna in the battlefield. He went through a whole transformation. Krishna offers all kinds of arguments why he should fight. At first he says, be utilitarian. I mean, if you escape the battle, if you leave the battle, they say you're a coward. This is pure utilitarian argument. Then he says, well, if you die in the battle, you go to Svarga. Svarga Dvara Pavritam. They open for you the doors of heaven, and all you gain there. So this is a higher argument. This argument is dharmic utilitarianism. And then he has a higher one, as I quoted, Karmani, Eva, Adhikaraste, and so forth, that you perform your duty for the sake of duty. Then he goes higher, and he says, give up the Vedas, give up Dharma, Bogeshvara Prasaktanam, Taya Parida Chaitasam, Givyasyat Mikabutir, Samadauna Vidyate. He says, go higher, your karma sukoshalam. He goes higher and higher. And eventually he says Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, anyhow, Karma Yoga, and then eventually he goes up to Bhakti, and goes up, and eventually he goes to Manmanava Hamed Bhakto Magya Jivan Maskuru. So it goes all the way up, but within the framework of Dharma. At no point does Arjuna leave his Dharma. His journey is internal.
Right.
The journey is internal. Externally, he maintains to his Dharma. And that is the wonderful thing about Bhagavad-Gita, that one undergoes an internal transformation, but keeps social stability, keeps to Dharma. He doesn't relinquish his Dharma.
Right.
He keeps to his Dharma. And that is the wonderful thing, that society can be dharmic, everyone is responsible, everyone follows their roles, and within that, everyone goes up and up and up in an internal spiritual journey,
right,
which focuses one's life, which gives a purpose, which gives spirituality, which gives meaning, which encourages restraint and a kind of austerity and minimalism. It's not like the consumerist philosophy that rationality serves many masters, but there's a direction there, and a direction which makes the world better in terms of ethics, in terms of environment, of social, of environmental sensitivity. All these things together, it's intertwined, Dharma and spirituality. So my answer is that the Bhagavad-Gita has a unique structure, which I didn't see anywhere else. I mean, the structure is unique. It brings it all together, but not only all these ideas, which you can find other sources, but the way they are structured, this is a very special and unique combination and structure, which as I mentioned, I call the three-story house structure.
Yeah, this is wonderful. So maybe I can take up some questions from the participants already there in the chat box. So if I go from, there is a comment from Subhas Goel that it's really refreshing to see the analysis of Bhagavad-Gita in a true sense with no bias towards any sects. Thanks for that compliment, Subhasji.
Thank you.
So he has another question. In India, there are different sects who interpret the Bhagavad-Gita according to their own traditions rather than analyzing what it is. It's a question or comment? Probably comment. Yeah. So, do you want to say anything on that? comment or?
Well, what I say is, see, when I offer my interpretation of Bhagavad-Gita, of course I have to be aware of the polemics between Advaita Vedanta and Vaishnavas, of course, which I'm aware of. I try to be very broad-minded in the sense to recognize both approaches, that some people read it as devotees, such as Ramanuja, Madhva, and other dualists, and some people read it like Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, which is okay with me. My commentary is flexible in the sense that I respect both approaches. Personally, I'm a devotee, and I prefer the dualistic reading. I would read Ramanuja and Madhva, and not so much Shankara. But I can also appreciate that people read it in the Advaita Vedanta system. So I would say that my interpretation is, in that sense, broad-minded and flexible, and giving room to various interpretations, and specifically to Vaishnavas and also non-Vaishnavas representing Advaita Vedanta.
Yeah,
so
right.
that will be actually when I was working in Cambridge, I was inspired by my professor there, who was at me, Julius Lipner, to give it a more Vaishnava, a more devotional touch. I said, I want to be philosophical, I want to be open to everyone, to give room to everyone. He says, no, the Gita is more devotional, go there, be free. But I was even hesitating. I tried to be like more neutral in my interpretation. I did some other work, which is very devotional on the Bhagavad Purana and on the Srimad Bhagavatam. That's another one. But as far as the Gita, I actually give room to various interpretations and readings of various sects. And I'm trying to have my commentary as non-sectarian, kind of open to all.
Yeah, that's great, actually. So oftentimes, as a committed practitioner, the idea of being a finalist often creeps in. And at the same time, the loyalty to a particular tradition, that also many times a committed practitioner wants. And how to really balance between the attitude of being a finalist, that this is all that can have, and then a broad framework where there are rooms for other kinds of transcendentalists as well. So what's your way to kind of harmonize? The devotee who is committed to a particular tradition, he may be okay with being being said that this is all that there. But in academic circles, certainly these things do not work out. On a general audience, as your books are quite appealing to for many classes of people. So how do you really draw I would say the mark, how much being a committed practitioner yourself, and at the same time writing for a non-sectarian audience, how to really find a personal tussle?
Let's see if I got the question right. When I was in Hong Kong, I was teaching Bhagavad-Gita and Hinduism in the university. And I had very close relations with a very nice gentleman who is a follower of Swami Chinmayananda. He was a disciple of Swami Chinmayananda. He was a third Mayavadi, strong Mayavadi. And I was very much friendly with him, and I wanted to do project with him because he was really to the Bhagavad-Gita, really studied the Gita, loved the Gita, and we were good friends. And the devotee said, how can you be so close to him? He's a Mayavadi. He's a Advaita Vedanta. And I told him also, I said, ISKCON is my family. This is my sampradaya. It's like a family. That's where I belong. This is where my emotions are. That's where I will dance in the kirtan. That's where I will go in festivals. That's my home. It's my sampradaya. I'm not going to join Chinmaya ashram. It's not my family, a religious family, so to speak. But I have great respect for people of knowledge, and I share the love from the Bhagavad-Gita, and I can see ourselves working together. So that was, and I did some great projects with him. in Hong Kong, and Gita lectures and things. And I felt very comfortable to cooperate with him, good friends and everything. But it was very clear that my home is ISKCON. That's my home. That's where I go to festivals. That's where I feel intimately associating with the devotees. And teaching the Gita is my service. That's my service to ISKCON. That's my service to the world, I think. That's my service to Krishna, hopefully. And I don't know. I feel quite comfortable everywhere. I guess I'm quite special in that being a Suridam Sarabhuta now. But that's why I feel I feel very strongly committed to ISKCON. That's where this is my spiritual sampradaya, my spiritual brotherhood, my heritage. That's where I come from. That's the way I go to the world. But in the world, I have all kinds of friends, and I do my service.
Yeah.
And I feel great. I don't know if I've answered the
I think
question.
being really broad-minded helps both aspects. Being a committed practitioner also at the same time, and a non-sectarian, presenter also. I think that way you reconcile both extremes very well. Yeah, that way.
Thank you. It's kind of you.
Yeah.
That's me, my personality.
Yeah, thank you for your works. And Rajesh Joshi is asking, thank you for the insights, Professor Theodor. How to actually or practically use Bhagavad-Gita in the construction of postmodern global ethics, given the situation, the world situation right now, the wars and all kinds of problems in the world. How do you see in a practical sense, apart from the philosophical and rational approach? How do you really any comments on that?
Well, I have some practical ideas which I've never put into practice. I have some vague ideas, but in general, I'm trying to equate the traditional dharmic terms with contemporary terms. You have the term business or private sector,
Right.
which of course I equate with the Vaishyas. You have a government or a public sector, which is of course the Kshatriya sector. And then you have the term, the third sector, which in the West looks at welfare organizations and so forth, and which I equate with the Brahminical sector. And in my interpretation of the local circumstances, I'm saying that what's happening now is that the Brahminical sector is very weak,
Right,
and the public sector, the Kshatriyas, they become more and more under the influence of the business sector, the Vaishyas.
right.
That's what's happening in society. You have the business sector gradually taking over the public, the Kshatriya sector, and the teachers, the Brahmins, are very weak. So my personal interpretation or social call is to strengthen the teachers, the Brahmins in society, saying that will balance. That's what society needs. So that's a kind of a contemporary interpretation of my ideas. I would say that to cure society, you'd have to strengthen the Brahminical forces, and that will balance the society. Because otherwise, what we have now is we have weak Brahmins, weak teachers, and we have weakening political structure, and we have a stronger business sector, which is overtaking through corruption, through bribe, through business enterprises, And anyhow, that's a kind of contemporary interpretations. I have a desire to do some project, social project, but it's very difficult for me to get out of academia, the world of ideas, and actually build up something convincing. I have some ideas and I may do some experiments, but I don't think it's going to be in a very large scale. I think my
Some
main
pilot project.
within academia, speaking and writing books, that's where I'm stronger.
Mhm.
And actually realizing that in the real social arena, I'm not sure. I have some ideas that I want to try, but I doubt it how far that will go as far as influence. I guess my ideas will be more influential on a theoretical in a theoretical framework, because that's what I know to do.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for that. And it quite resonates with traditional understanding also, the Chaturvarna system, Varnasam system. So as the Brahmanas, not necessarily I'm talking about the caste system, but
No,
the
no caste
Brahmanas
system.
by qualities who are
Yes.
really intellectuals and guides of the society, they need to be stronger. So that they are the teachers of the society. That's really resonates with even the traditional understanding also. The
Yeah.
framework of the basis of Varnasam system. So that's
Yes.
really good.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So thank you for that comment. So Omar is asking, doesn't the postmodern reject the very notion of a one direction? Aren't you simply assuming what's in the question, the truth of that one? I didn't get much from this question, so you can answer in some way.
Well, if I understand the question right, then that's basically what I'm saying, that postmodernity kind of in postmodernism, direction is lost. People don't know where to go. That's why identities are becoming weaker. I'm trying to say that modernism was much more clear as far as direction, rationality, responsibility, leadership. All these notions were much more solid. And postmodernity has created a world where things are more fluid and unclear, and direction is not very clear. One doesn't really know where to go. So many possibilities, especially if you open the internet or the cell phone. The whole world is in your computer or in your cell phone, and people just know exactly, I'm not really sure what to do. Previously, things were much more clear. You do what your family occupation is. Things were more clear. And this postmodernity creates some confusion. People just don't know what to do. And therefore, looking deeper into our nature through Bhagavad-Gita, we can find a new direction. This is my nature, and that will give me a direction. That's basically my argument. I'm looking at the mirror, so to speak, the physical mirror, seeing my gunas, my direction, and out of that emerges my duty. And it's very clear for me to do to find my way of life. Sometimes students, they come to me and say, we really don't know what to do in life. What should we do in life? So I ask them, what are your gunas? What is your nature?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I asked them.
Yeah,
what do you like to do? Are you inclined to be a teacher?
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to be a businessman? Government? I return the question back to them. I asked them, what is your nature?
Mm-hmm.
And once they know or have some idea what the nature is, say, why don't you go in that direction? Follow your nature, and that will be solid. So I'm actually applying that in my real conversations with real students, and they like it. I say, just let's see what your nature is, and by a few questions you can find out what a person likes to do, what their nature is, and that is based upon the Gita's vision of the gunas.
Mm-hmm. Right. This is really very practical suggestion. Some to identify one's own nature. That's really the foundation of any teaching or any kind of learning also. That's really necessary for us also. Not that everybody is working the same lane. I mean, depending on one's own nature, one can explore other possibilities, which is more conducive to him or her. So that's required.
Sham, Vasya, Prakriter Gyanavanapi, Prakritim Yanti Bhutani, Nigram, Kim Karishati.
Yeah. Right.
Even a man of knowledge follows his own nature. Even one knows, this is my nature, one cannot escape it. The nature is very strong. What can repression accomplish? Nigra, Kim Karishati.
So better to align that in a proper way as directed by Bhagavad-Gita. So that's the solution.
Yeah. It's a very strong force, our nature. We cannot escape it. So understand our nature and work from this point of view, from this point of departure.
Right. That's required. Yeah. So Mr. Tiwari has asked a couple of questions, but I can sum it up in one probably. So he's asking any practical solutions in the current Ukrainian war. So, what any solution for that in your words? So, yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it's a horrible war. I'm so sorry for all the people who are suffering from both sides.
Yeah.
And I don't think I can say anything beyond that.
Yeah, that's true. It's a really unpleasant experience for both sides. It's just for few people. Anyways, that's the history.
Yeah, I cannot give intelligent. I wish the world was more dharmic. That would be good for everyone. That's basically what I can say. But once in such a situation, I don't have anything spiritual to say, advice. I mean, what would I say? I'm so sorry for all the suffering which is going on. And I wish the war stopped immediately. That's all.
Yeah, true. And Mr. Tiwari has a comment that the Western culture rests upon the pillars of consumerism, media, acquiescence, inheritance, and so on and on. So, as written by Twani, so he's just a comment, I guess. Here's a question mark also. Yeah, I guess that's the same thing.
Well, basically, my point is that rationality has much advantages. I'm all for rationality. I'm not against rationality. But my point is, my critique is that rationality in itself does not have an ethical direction.
That is important, yeah.
And therefore, a person can be very rational, can be a scientist, can be brilliant, and be exploited by lower motives of someone who is employing him.
Right.
And I'm saying that this idea of the Bhagavad-Gita structure gives a direction. I'm not rejecting Western culture. I'm not rejecting rationality, but I'm trying to get direction from this Bhagavad-Gita structure, a spiritual direction.
Yeah, in fact, Bhagavad-Gita itself, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, please. So Bhagavad-Gita itself encourages critical thinking. I mean, Arjuna is again and again asking several questions. So the critical thinking, rationality is not rejected. So it's certainly, but it's given a proper ethical direction. So in a dharmic way.
Dharmic way, exactly.
There are a few more questions, I guess. Maybe we'll just take up one more question. Ancient Gurukul system had an inbuilt mechanism to implement ethics in a person, along with skills in needs as far as Varna or Swadharma. Are you having some such? Oh, he's asking for some projects, practical projects. So as serving mostly a philosopher, I don't think you must be taking up such practical demonstrative projects. So. Yeah.
I don't have, but I'm all for that. I mean, I am for. I think that education is the foundation. I'm all into a good education, good Gurukul education. I am all into that. that gives people a good moral stability, an aim of life. I mean, Gurukul system is great. It creates good people, fixed people, austere people. It's moral people. It's very good, of course.
Yeah, I think Binay Kumar has a question. What is the message on the collective morality offered by Bhagavad-Gita? So he's asking on collective morality. So
well, that's Dharma. This is of course a Dharma. This is the collective framework which can encompass the whole world. That's what I'm saying. Everyone can find his or her place within Dharma. And Dharma means service. Everyone serves society in some capacity. That's Dharma. Whether you are a Brahmin or Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, whatever, everyone serves society for the betterment of the world, for the betterment of the environment. This is exactly Dharma. And Dharma always means service, always means duty, always means self-restraint, that we cannot just try to accomplish or realize all our desires, but we have to practice some form of restraint. These are universal principles which are there in the concept of Dharma. Exactly.
Yeah, true. So I see no further questions. Yeah, Mr. Tiwari is asking so many things, but I would request if you could be a little precise on that. He's saying, Professor Theodor, is it not possible such thinkers like you and ISS can visit Kiev? I don't know, for ISS it's not possible. So I guess same for Professor Theodor also. Bhagavad-Gita was derived.
In such a grievance, I don't think I can. I mean, I can help personally. I don't take care of people here or there, but actually, that's not where people listen to philosophy. People listen to philosophy in more peaceful
conditions. Right. When but things are all good, we can try.
Yeah. No one has the peace of mind to actually discuss philosophy in these situations. That's too late. Now we're talking peacefully, thinking, reflecting, exchanging ideas. But once war begins, no one can think about anything.
Yeah.
It's like fire burns.
Yeah. Fighting the fire, right? True. So anyway, so we are really grateful to you, Professor Theodor. You took out almost 1.5 hours for us. So we are really indebted to you. So for enlightening words and deep reflections on Bhagavad-Gita. And I would thank all the participants who joined us and paid their attention for around 1.5 hours. Thank you so much, all of you. So see you next time, maybe in some other occasion, maybe physically sometime.
I'd be happy to come. I've been to the temple. It was wonderful.
Yeah, we are based in Delhi. So anytime you come to Delhi, please visit our
This is Partha Sarati temple?
Sorry?
Partha Sarati temple?
Yeah, it's we operate mostly from Radha Parthasarathi temple. And
I've been there. A wonderful temple. Yeah. I'd like to come again.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you.